I got into an argument with someone last month, a small one, the kind that does not matter to anyone except the two people in it, and I did not win it by being right. I won it by knowing exactly which sentence would land hardest and saying it anyway. I did not fight fair, I fought smart. And afterward I felt a little sick about it, and also, if I am being honest, a little satisfied. Ancient humans had that exact moment. Except their version of the unfair sentence was a plant. Somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, someone figured out that you did not have to hit harder to win a fight. You just had to make the smallest possible wound do all the work for you. And once that idea existed, war was never the same shape again. Which raises a question MS cannot stop turning over. Who was the first person clever enough, or desperate enough, to realize that a scratch could kill just as well as a spear through the chest? And what did that discovery actually do to the way humans fought each other? Hi, I'm Marin Still, and today, we are going all the way back to the first cheat code in human history. MS is not going to tell you this is some ancient horror story about mad scientists in caves. MS is going to show you something much stranger. The moment humans figured out how to make violence efficient was not a moment of cruelty. It was a moment of pure, cold problem solving. And by the end of this, you will never look at an arrowhead the same way again. Here is the problem early humans actually had. A spear, or an arrow tip made of stone or bone, is a decent weapon, but it has a flaw nobody likes to talk about. Most wounds from those weapons are not instantly fatal. A person can get hit, keep moving, keep fighting, sometimes for hours. If you are a small hunting band facing a rival group, or facing an animal that outweighs you by 500 pounds, that gap between wounding and stopping something is the gap where you die. So somebody solved it, not with a better weapon, with a better wound. The archaeologist Justin Bradfield has spent years studying exactly this, digging through southern African sites and residue on ancient bone and wooden arrowheads, looking for something most people would never think to check for: chemical traces of poison. And what he and other researchers found is that this was not a fluke, not a one-off invention by one clever person in one cave. Poisoned weapons show up again and again, independently, across completely unconnected human populations, on nearly every continent. Stay with me, it gets weirder. In southern Africa, sand hunters have used poison arrows for generations, and the sources are almost absurdly ordinary. Beetle larvae, certain plant saps, snake venom collected from already dead snakes. Researchers studying these traditions found that hunters were not just grabbing any toxic thing nearby. They were selecting specific species, specific preparation methods, specific ratios, refined over countless generations of trial, and presumably, a lot of very bad outcomes for whoever tried the wrong plant first. In South America, indigenous groups developed curare, a compound so effective at stopping muscle function that Western science eventually adapted it into surgical anesthesia. Let that sit for a second. A poison developed for hunting became, centuries later, something used to keep people still and alive on operating tables. The same chemistry, aimed in the opposite direction. And in the fossil record, there is something even older and stranger, sitting quietly in plain sight. Some researchers who study the deep history of hominin technology have pointed to modified bone and wood points, tens of thousands of years old, with wear patterns that do not match ordinary hunting damage. The evidence is not as clean as a modern lab test. Ancient organic poisons break down. They do not leave a nice chemical signature waiting for us, which means, frustratingly, we may never know exactly how far back this goes. We are only catching the edges of something that might be far older than any of the sites we can actually confirm. Here is the detail that made MS sit back for a second. This was not really a weapons upgrade in the way we think about upgrades today. Nobody was trying to make war more brutal for its own sake. They were trying to make an unequal fight survivable. A poisoned arrow does not require you to be stronger, faster, or braver than what you are facing. It just requires you to land one small hit and then walk away and wait. For a small band of humans facing a leopard, or a rival group with more warriors, that waiting was the entire strategy. Poison was not the weapon of the powerful. It was, overwhelmingly, the weapon of the outnumbered. And once poison entered human conflict specifically, not just hunting, something shifted in how people thought about fighting fair. There is a reason so many ancient and classical cultures developed a moral discomfort around poisoned weapons even while using them. Greek and Roman writers described poisoned arrows with something close to disgust, even as their own histories are full of poisoned wells, poisoned wine, and toxin-laced traps used against enemies. Chinese military texts describe using toxic smoke and contaminated water sources against besieged cities. Scythian warriors were famous and feared for arrow poisons so effective that a small wound was treated as a death sentence. So poison became this strange contradiction almost everywhere it appeared, effective enough that no one could resist using it, dishonorable enough that almost no one wanted to admit they used it. That contradiction is still sitting inside modern warfare, by the way. It is the exact same discomfort behind why chemical and biological weapons are treated differently, legally and morally, from a rifle or a sword, even though the actual goal, stopping another human being, is identical. We inherited that unease. We did not invent it. Ancient humans handed it to us, fully formed, thousands of years before anyone wrote a law about it. Here is the part MS keeps coming back to. The invention of the poisoned weapon was not really about chemistry. It was about a psychological shift. Once you can kill or disable someone with a wound that used to be survivable, the entire calculation of a fight changes. You do not need to be the stronger side anymore. You need to be the side that got there first with the smaller advantage. Strength stopped being the only currency of conflict. Cleverness became a currency too, and once cleverness becomes a weapon, the whole shape of who wins a fight changes forever. Which brings me back to that argument I mentioned at the beginning, the one where I did not win by being right, I won by knowing exactly where it would hurt. I think about that ancient hunter now, differently than I did before I looked into any of this. They were not thinking about honor. They were thinking about getting home to their camp alive after facing something bigger and stronger than they were. The poison was not cruelty. It was the great equalizer. It let the smaller, weaker, more outnumbered side survive an unfair fight by making the fight unfair in a different direction. So the next time you win an argument, or a negotiation, or honestly, just a moment of conflict, by finding the one small precise thing that lands hardest instead of overpowering someone directly, you are not being sneaky. You are doing exactly what your ancestors did tens of thousands of years before you existed. You found the smallest possible point of leverage and made it count for everything. Hi, I'm Marin Still, and now you can never unknow this.